Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I almost couldn't recognize myself. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the platform. And I'm glad to be here to share with you how we utilize the lessons from the Boko Haram crisis in Northeast Nigeria to defy despondence, displacement, and despair while delivering quality education in a complex crisis and low resource conflict situation. But before I go on, I would like to share a video which would kind of help us understand what it is that we are going to be discussing. So Paul, thank you very much. I see it's loaded. Please sit back and journey with us.
Da ya tafiya sai Boko Haram sun shigo Goza suka fara kashe mutane maza manya-manya. Wasu mazan ma suna yin dressing na mata haka sai dun kar a kashe su. Sai babana bai san abin yana faruwa ba sai ya shigo Goza. Sai akwai wani abokin shi da shi ma an ce mishi sai ya shiga Goza, sai ya shiga Boko Haram din. Sai shi ma ya ce ya yarda zai shiga Boko Haram amma kar a kashe shi. Sai ya ce wa babana ya shiga, babana ma ya ce shi ba zai taɓa shiga ba. Sai sun tafi suna yaƙi. Ya ce tun da ba za ka shiga ba, ya ce sai na nuna maka abin da ba za ka manta da ni ba. Shi ne can an jima yamma ya fara yi, ci suka zo gidanmu suka kashe shi. Shi ne daga can sai muka zo Bakasi. A gaskiya a kam akwai wahalar samun abinci, amma kowane wata da kowane karshen wata uku ake wata ana kawo ma mutane abinci. Amma hakan ma akwai wanda suna da iyali da yawa abincin ma ba sa iya samuwa. Saboda haka suna tafiya wasu yi wannan sana'ansu ko su je su yi aiki ko su wani abu tukunna su samu abincin da za su ci su kara da wanda za a dafa musu. A gaskiya lokacin da nake kam ba na makaranta, amma wata rana in na ga ba a bani da aiki a gida zan je makarantar kam wata rana. Gaskiya lokacin da mun zo kan sun karɓe mu da kyau. Kuma na ga filin ma na ji daɗi, na yi tunanin zan ji daɗin zama a gurin. Ban iya karatu ba, ban iya rubutu ba, in mutum ya min turanci ma ban san me yake gada ba. Amma yanzu zan iya karantawa, zan iya rubutawa, kuma in ka magana turanci ina yin understanding nashi kuma zan iya mayar maka. Ina son Lion Center saboda karatun da nake samuwa. No, ban taɓa yin kwamfuta ma, ban taɓa tunanin zan taɓa kwamfuta ba. Gaskiya suna nuna mana abin da ake a kan kwamfuta, inda ake scratch haka dai, inda za mu iya haɗa game duk dai ake nuna mana. Sunana Rabi, ina so in zama likita a rayuwata kuma na gode wa kowa da kowa.
Thank you so much for putting that up, Paul. I hope you enjoyed the video. But what you've seen is the story of Rabi. And Rabi is just one of thousands of children who are out of school and whose future essentially was gloomy because their communities were under attack by Boko Haram. But today we can see how we've been able to use her tragedy, and we've been able to use that as a springboard for a new world of hope and opportunities. In 3 years with Rabi being with us at the Learning Center, she learned to hold a pencil. She was able to identify letters, blend words, and count. And today we can see that she wants to be a doctor, and she's well on her way to doing that. She's completed a course on computer coding, and she's going to be someone who will be adding value to her community. But it's not just a story about Rabi. She's just one of so many children whose access was hindered by the conflict. And they've had, they weren't able to enjoy education. And in some cases, we saw that they didn't even have the opportunity prior to the conflict happening. So this is a story about change that was birthed by the Northeast Children's Trust Learning Center. And it's a story that I'm happy to be a part of and to share with you. To put this in context, I would like to speak on 3 different areas. And the first is, why is this important? The second is, what did we do? And the third is, what next? So to begin, I would like to give a bit of a background. For speaking about education, right now we know that education is both underfunded and it's really under threat. We know that 2/3 of the world's poorest people will be living in fragile and conflict contexts by the end of 2030, that's by the end of this decade. And we're seeing increasing armed conflicts, displacements, climate disasters, and it's resulting in a lot of disruption. And those, even though it's whole of society when this happens, the children mainly bear the brunt. And today, I think about 222 million children thereabout and youth have had their education disrupted because of one thing or the other. And Northeast Nigeria hasn't been an exemption. Since 2009, about 15 million people have been affected by the conflicts from Boko Haram. Lives have been lost, and there have been a number of people who've been forcefully displaced. And like I said before, this is a whole of society impact, but it disproportionately affects children that's 0 to 18. And what is worse about the Boko Haram insurgency is that it's not just like any ordinary war. This is an intentional attack on education. It's something that schools are not collateral damage like in other war contexts. This is actually an attack on education. So it's a systematically delegitimizing education. And if I give an example, in 2014, I don't know if you're aware, but 2014, we had about 275 girls who were abducted from a boarding school in Chibok in Borno. And that's where the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls became popular. And not all of them are back. A few, well, about 50% thereabout have been rescued. But when you hear their stories, they've experienced all sorts of sexual, physical, and physiological violence and abuse. And it presents a challenge, a real challenge in reintegrating them into society. When you engage with the girls, you would hear some of them would tell you that you cannot pay me to go back to school. And just interestingly, I think it was yesterday, there was a book reading, a book written by a lady called Melissa Fong, and it was part of the Ottawa Writers Festival. It was hosted by, I think, Lisa, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but Lisa Laflamme, or Laflamme, and she hosted that yesterday. And it was Melissa, you know, engaging with some of these girls and sharing their stories. And these are things that, you know, we've also experienced being from there and working in that space. Now, as communities are being uprooted and they're, you know, forcefully, there's forceful displacement, little things that, you know, we take for granted, routine community life, supportive systems for the ecosystem, rather for you know, family units and the community begin to get disrupted. So it's no longer safe. Development cannot be sustainable. And there's a lot of disruption and, you know, and things being destroyed. So you have education and livelihoods continuously being disrupted by this. And right now, I think there are about 2.8 million children who are in need of emergency education. And of those who lived in camps, 75% of them did not attend school. And you could hear from Rabi, she was one of those that, you know, wasn't in school consistently. And of those who finished school, 70% of them are not able to read, even after completing grade 6. And 72% of that population are actually girls. And as though that's not bad enough, we also have, you know, a huge number of orphans. In the states where we have about 27 local government areas, in one, that's the capital city, the number of orphans is about 52,000 orphans. And that's where we are actually intervening. Of course, you have a dearth in talent of teachers, and you can't even keep and retain teachers because of the environment. And what is also important to emphasize here is that this region in the country is actually one of the worst in terms of the developmental indices. So the conflict didn't start the problem of, education, access, and all that. It barely compounded that. And laid on top of that is now when we were hit by COVID. So it's like a triple whammy when you look at it. So there's the conflicts, there's years and years of developmental crises, and then there was now COVID. But it looks like, this is just a doom and gloomy situation. But what we were able to see is that sometimes when you have complex crises like this, it provides you an opportunity to be innovative in solving your problem. It's now, how do we make that happen? And that's what we were able to successfully do. The Northeast Children's Trust is essentially an entity that is led by the private sector. It's enabled by the government, and it's supported by the community. And what we're trying to do is to complement ongoing efforts of governments, both at state and federal level, knowing that it really does take a village. And what we looked at was, how can we deliver education in a space where there is conflict? And we saw very quickly that it's not just about going into build or rebuild schools or focus only on education, because there's so many other components of the system that have to play a certain part for us to have children who are well enough mentally and otherwise to be able to go to school. Children in this context, if you realize that it's not just putting them back in school that's going to solve the problem, but it's children with years and years of conflict. And it's going to require managing the trauma, psychosocial, providing the psychosocial support and getting them in a place where they are mentally ready. That's, and also having the community ready to embrace learning again. And we must also know that, against the backdrop of all the violence, there's the political, which I've mentioned, the weak institutions, the economic or macroeconomic instability that we've had there. Changing government policies are also things that affect how we're able to deliver sustainably in such an environment. But what we were able to do was and it wasn't something that was planned. There's no blueprints or roadmap. But for us, it was, how do we solve this problem? And it took us being in that environment, observing the environment, understanding how people lived before the conflicts, how people were living during the conflicts, and in areas where we are beginning to have recovery at the time, how were they living and what was the mindset? So observing that, living it with them, and also beginning to interact with them, ask questions. And from there, you begin to get, okay, what exactly is your need? Because sometimes you might think it's about just providing the school, but when you have a family that is traumatized, how do you deal with that? When you have a family that is trying to just survive and their children would be their means of livelihood, how do you also address that? So it's important to take those things into consideration when one is trying to solve a problem. And that was what we were able to do. And we were able to learn from and learn together in designing how this intervention would come about. We also knew that there were a number of obstacles on the way, but it was important to study those obstacles. And in some cases, we saw that the obstacle became the way. And so we had to start from what was safe and what was familiar. So in putting together the center that you saw, it was us, again, drawing from all the experiences, how do people live? So for instance, in the North, where there's so much land, abundance of land, people build wide, they don't go high. So our infrastructure had to take that into consideration. They live more in communities, so the homes are structured in that way. And so you had to make it a place that is safe and familiar. We also had to take into consideration that the fact that Boko Haram had legitimized education and people just did not want to go to school. On a good day, was a struggle to get families to get children, especially girls, to go into school. But with this, it was even more difficult. So we started from, as an example, we started from using their faith as the way. So if they were willing to have their children, go to school, Arabic school, and learn the Quran, or go to Bible study and read the scripture, we started with that. But what we did was we would have them, dress up nicely, wear like a uniform, pick up a book. So you have a book in your hand. It just may not be formal education, but you have a book in your hand, and you then go to school for a period of time. So by starting with that, we got them comfortable and we made them feel safe, and then slowly built on complementing that with formal. And you notice that, there's the whole thing about Western education, because Boko Haram itself means that education is forbidden. And it was an attack against what is considered Western education. So even in terms of communicating to family members when you want to take on their words, it's being mindful of the language and how that comes across. And that only for us came about by us understanding and working with the community to learn what the nuances were and what the social construct looked like. So largely the intervention came as a partnership of a number of actors. So I don't have a background in education, for instance, but it was about how do we solve a problem? What do we need to do? So you learn from teachers who had been there, teachers who had also, many of them were barely out of their teens when the conflict started. So they were able to bring in their experiences. We also did a lot of journaling of the children. So journaling of the children, you get to observe them for periods at a time and begin to see what trends we could map, and how would we use that to help in building an environment where there's wellness and then there's education and children can learn. And we saw very quickly that within a very short time, 3 years, yes, we were able to demonstrate and see children successfully go from being completely unlettered to finding their right places in either secondary school or still in primary school. And we were also able to demonstrate a number of things, even how digital, bridging that digital divide, bringing them in, doing programs like coding, which was completely done virtually. So it shows that these children, they're like sponges. You just need to give that environment that would enable them. And so now we started with about 100 children and we slowly built up. And so far, we've had about 683 children go through the center. 300 thereabouts are now in the government secondary schools. So they've been able to transition out after we provided them with the foundational education. And for us, it's lifelong learning. And it's about having the children develop a mindset that allows them to continuously grow, continuously learn. So we've been able to transition about half of them into secondary school. Today, I think we have about 10 who are in university. Our first graduate would be next year. He's studying computer engineering at American University in Nigeria, in Yola. And we've had a number of them who've also gone on to do different vocations. Those who couldn't get into formal education, but we focused on foundational literacy, numeracy, as well as financial literacy, and helping them adjust be reintegrated into society. So we've had them come up with all sorts of innovations, each one teaching one, each one holding one together and moving forward. But we see that the intervention required a lot of resources when we started. But what we also began to explore is how do we, from that one center, how do we impact many around us, knowing that alone the government cannot do this, and knowing that alone we cannot do this. But how do we become that bridge for those that are in the school to go out? So that was a residency program. Then we also had the in-community, where we opened our doors for children who are in school or not in school to come in for programs. So working in partnerships, we open our science labs for use. We have the digital program, which we also, extend to children within the community. And essentially we have the place functioning as a shared facility. So one way or the other, there is learning and there is wellness and well-being going on. So about 6,000 children odd have been through our facility. What's interesting was that we started off trying to address SDG 4. But in the life cycle of the project, we've been able to touch on about 11 of the SDGs. And it's everything from even harnessing the power of solar to power our center. So the power of sunlight to power our center, poverty, jobs. We created about 38,000 jobs in the life cycle of the project, about 132 full-time staff, and over 50 small businesses that we support, and also support the school or the center. We don't call it a school because it's not quite a school. Support the center year in, year out. We've also been able to, add value and also start like small social enterprise, like computer-based testing centers. We're running that within the facility. And so it's been a huge learning experience. And when people see some of like the videos that we shared, it's like, wow, you've done so much, but so what next? And for us, it's to look critically at what we've done. Like I mentioned, there was no blueprints, there was no roadmap. This was something that being now in the program, the advanced leadership and social impact, I'm learning that this is actually a combination of both systems thinking and design thinking, and bringing that together. But it was almost intuitive to us when we started in putting this together. But what is interesting, and what we're finding interesting, is that, is this a fluke? Is this something that just happened? Can we interrogate this? Let's interrogate what we've done. And that's the next step for us, is to interrogate what we've done with a view to critically looking, what impacts did we make? How did this happen? And if we're able to, indeed there is a change, there's an impact, is this a model that can be replicated elsewhere? And we want to be able to do this harnessing the power of film and to tell social impact stories. And so that's what we want to do now with the amount of work that we've done and the work that we're still doing, is to go back to the beginning and ask questions, interview, and have a documentary that would have a global appeal, and bring experts and have it open and honest, and have experts in different parts, whether it's trauma care or it's education or it's governance, to be a part of this and see whether we have actually, if we're really onto something in terms of how can we deliver education in conflict context, but also the questions we're all asking around how is education being delivered now. I mean, my son, for instance, was in a school down south, which is a completely different world from up north, but even being there and going to school, to a private school, he still had challenges learning because it was basically 2 + 2 is 4. He's not allowed to think that you can get 4 by subtracting, 4 from 8. He's not being taught that way. He's being taught in a very, it's very cookie. It's 2 + 2. It's after this is next and next. But me having the experience in the Northeast, I was able to help him to have that mindset of growth. So while it's a conflict context in the Northeast Nigeria, it could be something completely different somewhere. Maybe this might help in answering some of those questions. And so I think for me, it's having the opportunity to share this with you, is to see, again, just throw out a little challenge here to see if it's possible to maybe work with 1 or 2 of you. I don't know, anyone who's interested. Can we interrogate this with a view to really adding value to education and well-being globally, and beyond just looking at Northeast Nigeria? So thank you so much. I think I've been able to share with you our story, our journey, and thanks for the platform, and I'm open for questions or any further information you might need.